All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ECDataWorks webinar. We're really excited today to share a new tool that has been created over the last 18 months with you all as state leaders. This is really designed for you. And so we also have other state leaders here with us today to talk about the experience of both developing and using it. So with that, go to the next slide. I'm joined today. My name is Missy Coffey. I'm the co-PI for ECDataWorks. I'm joined by my fellow co-PI, Phil Serendides, and Allie, who are both from Penn State. And we are all ECDataWorks team leads who have been working on creating this tool using state feedback. So we're really excited again to share that with you. But as mentioned, this is a tool that is designed and really supposed to be designed for and by state leaders. So we're excited to have 4 state leaders here today with us that will be participating with us as state panelists. We have Lauren, Jared, Ben, and Megan are all going to be here to share their experience, both helping to create and use this process within their own kind of state context today. So thank you all for being here. As we get started, we wanted to remind you all that this is really designed around early childhood integrated data systems. And so we really wanted to kind of focus how we design tools, especially since there's a small population of states who are really trying to use this. But we wanted to provide this opportunity for state leaders to really get a sense of what this looks like and feels like when we're using it, which is why we have other folks here today to share their experience. We're going to do that. We're going to take questions as we go along. So please feel free to use the Q&A chat feature as we're going. And we will also welcome questions after. But today we're really hoping to really focus on what is the tool that we are now referencing as a use case repository? What is it? How does it help us to define and scope use cases around early childhood data systems? And then again, we're going to have the states talk about practical ways that they have used this tool in their work and their own processes of developing use cases. So within the context of an ECIDS, we've all seen probably the rainbow. It's a very common tool to talk about what an ECIDS is. Today, our webinar is going to really focus on the bottom 2 boxes, the red and the green box, which are like, what are the questions and how do you take action? That's really where the heart of a programmatic use case is centered. And so today, as we're thinking about this, we're less about the integration of the data and more about how are we actually using the data to actually inform program policy decisions. To give you some context, in 2022, ECDataWorks conducted a survey that we've just recently kind of revised and updated for the 2024 national data. One of the things that we ask about are the types of use cases that states are both in the creation or creating now or have already been developed. So in 2022, on this slide, you can see that there were the top 3 use cases were focused on program quality, improvement, early identification of vulnerable populations, and school readiness. In 2024, there's some commonality, right? There's continued, we still see a lot of use cases on quality improvement, but we're also now seeing more that have been developed around deserts and family access, as well as school readiness. That's not a big surprise because if you look at the 2022 use cases in development, the 3rd option was program quality and improvement. So we would hope that some of those use cases that were in development in 2022 have moved over to now being in development by 2024. We also know this is a long process. So some of those are still being in development. So things such as understanding workforce shortages, as we all know, there's a long way to go in the both data we collect and how we report it. So we're making some progress, but as you can see in 2024's top 3 still continues to include the workforce shortage data, transitions to K. And the biggest kind of shift we're seeing in 2024 is that there's both more use cases that are developed around deserts and family access, but there's also more in development. So we're going to expect to see that a lot of the use cases coming out nationally are still going to be focused on kind of what we often will see as descriptive data around service deserts and access. Which are all great things to know, and because I think what that helps us to understand is that there are some common use cases that are being developed. And I think you'll see from some of the state examples that we're going to show you today that there are a lot of things that are both common, but we also know that they need to be customized by states. So when we thought about this and what it means, the background for the kind of what we call the use case repository is that we wanted to kind of gather some of these examples. If they're developed, instead of each of you having to go out and find Ben and ask what their tool looks like, to actually have a place where you all can just go and kind of click and see the information, then download it and then customize it for your state. Our hope is honestly that this will help reduce the amount of time that we spend kind of thinking about the ideas and focusing more on going deeper into the actual content being developed. So with that, I think that background, knowing the background is really more focused on We know the programmatic use cases, and I think we'll put the template out there for you guys to see. But 4 or 5 years ago, we developed a kind of brief that actually walks through what is a programmatic use case. Many states have been using that to actually develop their use cases, start to kind of mock them up, and then use that to develop the technical requirements. That being said, we really want to see that. So I think we are excited to be able to pivot that over. And I think Phil is going to talk a little bit how we really thought about making this tool useful for states and the functionality that existed.
Great, thank you, Missy. So behind the use case repository is a data model, and we're attempting to follow a design process that is what we advocate for ECIDS, where we start with the information needs and then think about planned uses for this repository tool. So some of the intended uses were to be inspirational, to share success stories of what states are doing, also case making, thinking about giving concrete evidence of the value, and also operational, right? Providing practical examples for states to see what others are doing and frameworks that they might be able to follow. So we aimed here to try to clarify what are programmatic use cases, what are they not, and how are they used. They are different from some other products that might be important and used in an ECIDS. Right? They are not tech development projects. They are not project charters. They are not MOUs. So we wanted to be thoughtful about that and realistic about where the field is right now to make sure that it has tangible benefits. So here we have 3 different schemas. We wanted to think about the diversity and also the unity of use cases that are currently out there so that we can support states in crafting and then sharing and then using use cases that are included. And so while some use cases are very exciting to think about, deep analytics and more complex use cases, not all are or should be that complicated. So we, as I said, try to practice what we advocate for. We solicited feedback over numerous rounds. We iterated the process, developed a data schema that ended up being more streamlined by the time we got to the end of the design process to, again, focus on those information needs. So at the end of the day, after we received feedback and we're able to develop this schema that serves as the data structure for the repository that we're about to walk through in just a moment, we just wanted to sort of begin at the outset by thinking about what are the essential elements that are important for any use case, but also a model that can be adaptable to a broad spectrum of state examples. Certainly, the information here is just part of the full use case, and that there would probably be a need and interest to learn more beyond what is included in the repository. That's why there is included some attachments and other supporting materials that can be included with a use case. But just wanted to give you a sense of how we were being thoughtful about developing the data model, the schema that organizes this information. And so that's probably enough, and it'd be more interesting to actually do a live walkthrough of the repository. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ali, for that. Ali, I think you're muted, sorry.
I am. I was talking to myself. Did that switch over to the website for everybody? All right, thank you. All right, so this is the ECDataWorks landing page where you can come and find information on both the background of ECDataWorks as well as tools and resources. You can learn about past events as well as upcoming events, and most importantly, what we're here to talk about today, the use case repository. And so you access that by going up here, and you're going to click Search Our Repository. And this is going to take you to the use case repository landing page. And building off of what Phil and Missy have shared, this is a centralized platform where you can find the examples from your colleagues of programmatic use cases. And as you navigate through this page, first you will find a description of programmatic use cases and how they support ECIDSs, ECIDS. And then you find some applications for state use, some recommended materials, including the programmatic use case template, which we will be sharing here hopefully in a few minutes, as well as in follow-up, we'll share the link to the template. And then you can listen in on some previous podcasts that ECDataWorks has produced related to this work. So if you keep scrolling down the page, and apologies for the scroll, you will get to the section of the examples that I previously mentioned. And here, I personally like to click View Full Screen. You can also use the secondary slider if you wanted to stay within this page. We'll go View Full Screen, and that will open in a separate tab. And then we just wanted to take some time to highlight today the ways in which you can explore the different use cases that are included in the repository. So first, we wanted to highlight that you can sort, so you can look across the different elements of a programmatic use case and think about what you might most be interested in. So perhaps you're interested in sorting by topic. Close out of this. And so you can see here in this third column that we are now sorting by use case topic. So you may be interested in a use case on access, perhaps on community assessment, transitions, thinking about what Missy shared earlier, that some of these are the emerging use cases that we're finding out of the national survey. Or perhaps that's not how you want to search. Perhaps you know that a peer in a state has been working on a use case and you're interested in learning more about that. So you might sort by state. And so again, alphabetically starting with California and going down to Utah. So the other way, let me clear this. Oh, all right. The other way is perhaps you like searching based on an area of focus that you know is of interest to you, but you might not be as familiar with the use case template. So you might be like, well, I don't know if I'm looking for a topic or I'm looking for a question or a reason. You can use the search bar. And so perhaps you're interested in use cases that involve funding. This will search across all the fields. So not field specific, but you do end up with a match across 3 use cases. And you would have to potentially explore a little bit more to see if the match is what you're looking for, but you can search based on that keyword using the search function. So then to click in on an example of what this looks like, we are going to go ahead and explore the Utah example a little bit. We just uploaded this use case in the last couple of weeks. And so you can see you get a snapshot specific to the use case. So you can see the state, again, that topic, documentation, and most of the use cases included in the use case repository do have a PDF that documents the actual programmatic use case, and I'll click in on this in a second. You can see the data elements that are included, the actions and reasons, and then some of the roles of individuals who might find this use case beneficial. And if you click into the documentation, you will then be able to dig even deeper and see the programmatic use case. And again, this is a useful element to learn from peers, to understand some of the thinking that they put into their use case development. And it might even help you think about some key questions that you might reach out and connect as you're working through your own process of developing use cases. Let me close out of this. And I'll close out of this. I do want to go back and highlight real quick, in addition to the use cases that are available, this is a living resource, and hopefully, and our hope is to continue to grow this resource. And so we are encouraging states to think about what use cases they may have available to contribute to the use case repository. And we would encourage you to use this submission form, or feel free to reach out to us and say, hey, we think we have a use case that might fit the repository, and our team is happy to work with you to help craft the programmatic use case and think about what would be useful, again, to share across with your colleagues working in this space. Apologies for the scroll. And so with that, that's sort of the nuts and bolts of the use case repository. Again, you access it from the ECDataWorks website, and we will also follow up with this direct link. And with that, I'm going to navigate back over to the slides and turn it over to Missy. And feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A.
Thanks, Allie, for walking through the quick tutorial on where to find the actual use case repository. So as Phil and I think Allie have both highlighted already, this is really just a resource to help states find quick information that you can then customize to create your use cases, right? So if you're going to work on a developmental screening use case, it might help to look at what Utah did and at least start from some of that understanding and then be able to build from there and customize. And that's really the hope of having this information available for other states, is to both see what's already out there and happening and to build from it. So what I think helps with some of that context is to understand, what is this process look like? What does the process look like in a couple of states, to understand, like, how does this tool fit into a process? Because we will talk a lot about how the product actually is really not the goal. We always talk about how an ECIDS is not the outcome we're working. We're trying to use the data to inform policy and practice. So how is this tool helping us to get one step closer to that? So it helps to hear a little bit how states are actually developing these program use cases, because that, I think, also explains why there's only a handful of them publicly available, because it is a very intensive process. So I'm going to start by maybe asking Lauren if you can start us off by talking about California's process.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Missy. Thanks for having me. So I manage the special projects team in the Research, Automation, and Data Division in California's Department of Social Services. CDSS oversees the majority of our state childcare programs, so that's where our ECIDS lives. So yeah, the use case development process involves bringing together a lot of experts, and I would say it is meant to help them make connections between their programs and some of the common challenges and policy questions. It is a pretty, I wouldn't say time intensive, but it does take a long time because there's multiple steps to it, at least the way that California facilitated the process. We started with sort of a high-level prioritization work group that brought together programmatic leaders and data experts that basically looked at our master plan for early learning and care and sort of pulled out the key policy or topic areas that they would want to see addressed by an ECIDS. And then so we ended up having 18 total options. Eventually, after many meetings, we narrowed those down to 3. And that was really where the process of actually developing the use case document, that text document, that's really where that started. The work groups basically over maybe like 7 meetings collaborated, worked on those documents, and then about a year later. So this whole process at the very beginning was spring 2022, and then all the way through fall 2023. It was kind of the full cycle where we had 3 usable use cases. They were approved by our executive committee. And then we were really lucky to be asked if we would include them in the repository. And I think that was November 2023. So like I said, it took a while. The buy-in and the support is really important in the process. So it's okay that it takes a while. And like Missy kind of already mentioned, it's not really the product, but more so the process and the discussions that you have with others along the way, which sounds a little cliche, but it is really about the partnerships and making sure that those are the connections between programs and people are there.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Lauren, for sharing. So it's great to be here. My name is Jared Stevens. I'm with the Nebraska Department of Education. I'm a research specialist and also a new role for me. I'm the ECIDS analytic lead for Nebraska. And so, I think our process is actually fairly similar to what y'all do in California. It's probably not as organized as what you described. I think ours kind of happened a little bit more organically. But really, it has been an evolving process for us since 2020 when we really ramped up our ECIDS efforts. We call it ECIDS in Nebraska. Just want to call that out rather than ECIDS or ECIDS. So So some of this work did happen before I joined the team, but basically right when we started building our eKids, we did a lot of stakeholder engagement and work to really just try to understand the types of use cases that are needed and wanted in our state, and that would be really valuable for our stakeholders. And so, for this process, similar to California, we really tried to cast, as wide of an audience and net as we possibly could. We tried to include everyone that we could think of that has some sort of stake in early childhood and early childhood data within our state. And so this included, representatives from our state level agencies, our program administrators. We had providers, service directors, policymakers, community advocates, healthcare providers, members from community organizations, researchers, professors, really just as broad of a group as we could possibly get. And so for this work, we administered some surveys, we did some listening sessions, we had some interviews, some focus groups to really just develop that initial list of use cases and try to understand what all these different stakeholders wanted to do with all of this early childhood data within our state. And so obviously, this was before the use case repository, but we did kind of do, some similar work as to what the repository is trying to do, and that we spent a lot of time manually reaching out to other states and seeing, what use cases they were working on. And so when I actually first started my eKids role, I spent a ton of time, a lot of you might actually remember me because I reached out to you just trying to have conversations to understand, what use cases, what research questions you were trying to answer in your state. And so with all this work, I think our initial list of use cases was 51. I know Lauren, you mentioned 18 in California. We actually had 51, and so it was a very expansive list. Obviously, we were very ambitious when we were just getting started. We'd love to be able to just meet one of those use cases right now. But then we spent some additional time kind of refining that list. And so we spent some time understanding what data sources are needed, how big of a lift that, that use case would be, how long, the use case might take to answer, because some of them, are longitudinal in nature. And so we kind of had our own matrix for creating our use cases, kind of similar to this repository, trying to understand, the data that's needed, where the data, was currently located, what data system in our state, that target audience, the goal of the use cases, the functionality that's needed to kind of really, meet that use case. And so then finally, with a similar group of stakeholders and using that kind of matrix we created, we went through a prioritization process similar to what Lauren was talking about in California, to really just understand the use cases that were of highest priority or need within our state. And so, at this point, we were kind of working with a core team of stakeholders, so some stakeholders that really just had a much more of a stake and were, much more interested in this work. And so we really tried to focus on providing data for those stakeholders and those use cases that were most applicable to that core team. And so we knew if we targeted those users with the most interest and it was useful to them, that you could really gain that buy-in and that true partnership, as Lauren was trying to, describing in California. So, fairly similar to California, this whole process took quite a while to go through. As I mentioned, I spent the better part of my first year in my eKids role working on this. So this was several months for just identifying and creating those use cases, all those listening sessions, and then several more months of stakeholder engagement, really refining and prioritizing those use cases and getting down to those three main use cases. And even now, admittedly, it's required a lot of revisiting and tweaking, making sure the metrics that we provide are useful, adding, additional data sources or programs and those kinds of things, just to make sure that these use cases are still useful to our stakeholders and that they serve value for them.
Apologies, I'm relearning Zoom again for the day. My name is Megan Salois. I'm the Early Childhood Policy and Data Manager with the state of Maine. The ECIDS, eKids, we use vary between both and the state of Maine. Are within that first year or so process, as Jared was outlining, where we're figuring out what the value add looks like for our use case directions, where are the areas that have big barriers, reasonably feasible looking barriers we're not sure how to navigate yet, through a variety of methods where fortunately the state of Maine has done a lot of work in evaluating what these barriers and gaps look like in our service models. Early childhood and education is a big area of needs, gaps, and multiple perspectives of those gaps, where A needs assessment was conducted the last year, as well as a gap analysis study. And the past several months, our process is looking at the aggregate data, the data that already exists between these systems that work in the early childhood and education sphere, so we could see what already exists. We want to add value, but we also don't want to duplicate efforts, and we want to make sure that the ECIDS process for Maine is in alignment and collaboration with the existing partners in the agencies. Between looking at these aggregate data models and how the current data systems are operating, we've also spent a lot of time engaging in our other agency partners, talking through the vision for the ECIDS, answering questions, and asking for questions, asking for different perspectives from these various departments of their perception of what are some biggest challenges you deal with on a regular basis from your role, from your seat. What do you perceive as priorities for gap area A, B, or C, depending on the needs assessments we've looked at? So really a lot of fact-finding missions and information gathering while looking through a tremendous amount of data and seeing what we didn't know that we didn't know, so we can further determine the best path forward. I've also spent a lot of time listening and learning from my peers in other states, especially states with a lot of rural communities. Maine is 92% rural, which is quite a large amount of this very hilly, bumpy state, to figure out how do we address the rural needs in particular, where there's service deserts, large gaps in scope of access, and determining what's the most important place to start. So with that grand scale question in front of us, we were really thinking about where do we start and how do we set the ECIDS process up for not only longevity and success, but that value add, reduction or avoidance of duplicating efforts, and having the ECIDS stand alone as its own distinct program that adds that value. We're looking at finalizing a programmatic use case development process as we've done all this research and experimentation and evaluation. I think much as to Jared, and I think Lauren's points as well, of looking through, constantly evaluating, looking at your metrics, looking at what's working, even if it was a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, what's working well, what should we tweak or fine tune, or things that we need to work better around to engage in buy-in or work through logistics questions. So there's definitely a large amount of evaluation and critical thinking skills, but it's a great thanks to my peers that are in these similar roles that offer that feedback, even just in terms of their own learning curves as they move through, especially the first year of time.
Well, what's great about what you've all said is you're all at different stages of the use case development process and your system development. So, I mean, that makes sense as well. But you've all highlighted, and I think by the nature of this question, that there is a process to this, right? And I think Lauren started off this response to the question by pointing out that we're talking about a use case repository for a product that gets created as a result of this process. And I think that's an important reminder as we start to think about the next piece of it. Sometimes it's helpful to have something we're creating with a work group or with a set of community, folks that we're working with in our communities to do something. And that's really what the programmatic use case template was always designed to be, right? It was designed to have people come together and work on this collectively. Does mean that it takes time, but the product of having it is not the end result still, right? We still want to use this to then do something different. And so the next question is going to focus a little bit more on, you all decided, and Megan's team has used it to help their state because they're in a different stage of development, but both Nebraska and California decided to share your examples in the use case repository. These were the products that came out of sounds like very intensive process that took a long time. So why did you decide to share that, especially given the amount of work that went into creating this product? Like what is the value add in sharing this now with other states from your perspective?
Yeah, so I can jump in on that one. In Nebraska is just, what I've noticed is it's just the spirit of the community that's been built around the ECIDS work. It's I remember back to the very first conference that I went to related to ECIDS that was outside of Nebraska, and we were lucky enough to get buddied up with Stephen Matherly from Utah. And if anybody has met Stephen or knows Stephen, you kind of know his, you know, his vibe, and he was very much, we will give you anything that will help you that I'm allowed to give you. And so that was very much the spirit of the work in the community, is that it's difficult work, it's new work. Maybe within your state, you feel like you're isolated in doing this work, but across states, we're trying to accomplish similar things. So, I mean, we're not competing. It's not about who gets to the moon first. It's about how can we help each other get to that next step. And so as we started working with states that are a little bit further ahead, there's a lot to gain from them. As Jared mentioned, one of his first tasks on the job was to reach out to those states and ask, where are you with your process? What use cases have you developed? Which use cases are you thinking about? So we spent a lot of time gathering that stuff manually, but it really informed the direction that we went. And, you know, we didn't run into anybody who said, nope, we're keeping this close to our chest. We're not going to tell you what we're doing because it's ours and you figure it out for yourself. Everyone has been amazingly open to discussions and sharing. And so we feel the obligation, not just the obligation, but it's just, I feel like it's the right thing to do, to give back where we can. So if it's working for us, and also I think that an important piece is that, we're willing to talk about warts and all. And I think that's another testament to the community, that it's not just about talking about what's working and pretending like everything is perfect and the work is linear and we're always checking off those milestones. There's times that you take a step back, a step forward and then 2 steps back. And it's important to share those things as well, especially with the use cases, because across states, they're never going to look the same. So sharing those things and being part of the larger community of the folks working on this has been monumental in our progress. And so we really just want to give back. And so that's one of the reasons that we shared the use case, and willing to do so as we move forward. So, but excited to keep sharing and keep gathering info from other states as this thing picks up.
Yeah, I agree with what Ben's saying. I think it's very much in the spirit of the ECIDS community to share, and to anything you can do to sort of cut down on the time that it takes people to get help on something like this, just because it is so specialized and it is, as Ben was saying, really new, I think is really important. So for California, for sure, echoing what Ben was just mentioning, in the spirit of community and collaboration, I would also say it makes concrete the success of just having use case documents. And it's sort of I know for our team, like, it's a point of pride that we were able to share, like, even though they are imperfect, it does make the progress that we've made like really concrete, and helpful to other, as a resource, and helpful to other states. It's also, I think, because it makes the progress really concrete, it's good evidence, like, for going to leadership and other spaces to say, like, hey, we have this progress, we have this product to share that's part of the ECIDS community, and we want more money to do X, Y, or Z to continue the work. For California, we're looking at our next round of use cases, or at least 1 or 2 other ones. So we would start the process over again. So it certainly legitimizes the work, and I think can be helpful in conversations around resources and sustainability.
And you both have pointed out, especially with the sustainability and resource development for other states who may not have as many large grants, whether it be an SLDS grant or a PPG grant, these are things that can help make progress that aren't super resource intensive. They're time intensive, but if you have the right folks, it sounds like, given your processes, it can still kind of be done and help make progress towards being ready to apply for other federal or kind of philanthropic grants. And you've all mentioned how much time it saves, other resources. So when you think, my next question really focuses more on when you think about the future of this work, how do you plan to use this from, like, somebody not just contributed, but can use this in the future to help make progress, so that the ECIDS are truly being able to provide data that can inform policy and practice decisions, right? It's a programmatic use cases designed to get the questions collected, documented, be used to inform some how the technical requirements go out. what is that going to look like, or how have you used it? How do you plan to use it? So maybe Megan, we can start with you. That's since you're a newer state and you're kind of newer to the creation of this process. How do you see that working?
Sure. So I think the use case repository is a really great opportunity to see what other states are working on from a context area, as well as an understanding of what's being prioritized in other states. As I mentioned earlier, Maine being a super rural state, we're certainly not the only rural state. There's a lot of differences that each of our states have, but there can be a lot of similarities as well. And when you look at states that might share a lot of those similarities, that are working on some of the areas in the use cases you've thought about, or people in your partnerships or stakeholder groups have brought to your attention, and you can see those efforts in action in other states' use cases, it can be really helpful to just get the brainstorm going, working with other states, such as Utah, for example. We were walking through some ideas around developmental screenings, where Maine is in incredible infancy in that stage of the game, and thinking about addressing that, where Utah is much further ahead, being able to look at that use case in the repository and then coordinate with that state that's working on it and ask questions, brainstorm, and think through some areas that you're struggling to address in your state is just a really helpful tool. And I think it's a really great advantage that I think in a lot of other areas of data work, you may not always have that opportunity. And not only is peer-to-peer support integral in a role like this, where we're forging new paths a lot of the times in these states, doing something that hasn't really been trialed very much or at all, it's helpful to have somebody that's maybe a few steps ahead on the path that can look back and help you with some things that either they got help with or figured out or experienced themselves through trial and error. It's just very helpful. And in terms of then sharing one of Maine's use cases in the repository, the opportunity to continue in that same spirit of helping and support and sharing lessons learned, as well as giving that context of priorities that we're looking at and questions that we're trying to ask and trying to answer as well. It's again all about value add while we de-silo here in Maine, and I'm sure that's the case in other states. That central repository and those conspiratorial efforts amongst peers, I think, helps contribute to that unsiloing, so we can focus more about the work and the policy rather than just the data. It's about data-informed policy and data-informed practice.
Yeah, I agree with Megan's points. The peer conversations and the peer support from other states, some people have the connections in the network or don't. And so I think this does provide like a scaffold for people that maybe don't. I'm pretty new to the ECIDS, even though California's is pretty far along, and the conversations have predated me on our ECIDS, but I was really new to the space. So I think it does provide like connections for folks, points of contact. More than that, I think we have, our work groups that will be working on, whatever topic policy areas California lands on for our next round of use cases. I think they're a really good, like, practical starting point for conversations with people who maybe haven't thought about this work or haven't gone through the process of like creating a use case. So you can give a good exemplar, or at least, a starting point for discussion. What do we like about this? Even if it's not the same exact topic area or policy area, I think it certainly is a good discussion starter, especially as you're bringing people together across different agencies and departments. California is really big, and there's just so many different people to consider to involve. And so it's a good kind of neutral starting point to talk about some other examples. So I think I would use some text use cases from the repository for the working groups and kind of bring out some examples that I think would be good discussion starters. As like, okay, we want to work on developmental screening, like Megan was saying. Here's some examples from Utah, Maine, and now let's kind of dig into how ours would be different or how ours would be similar.
Yeah, I agree with Lauren. And, I'm really looking forward to using this in our next round of use case development. Because as I mentioned, when we started this, it was just kind of, we manually pulled some together, but I mean, it was sitting down with stakeholders and kind of starting with a blank slate and an empty matrix and saying, please fill out your ideal use cases for this future concept of a system. And I think that was really hard for people to wrap their minds around because they didn't have anything to hang those ideas on. And whereas this, if we had something like this in place, I think Lauren mentioned it earlier, but it also legitimizes the work. It's not just us who are getting paid to do this that think it's a good idea. I mean, this is happening with other states, and they've made progress. They have these products to show from it. They can run these analyses that end up in real decisions and real impact in programs and the services that are provided. So it really legitimizes kind of the beginning to end process. So we build the technology for a purpose. We don't just do it because we think it's fun. Some people think it's fun, but it has to connect to that real world impact, and that happens through the use cases. And so, I mean, being that also, we're still in, at least in Nebraska, we have no state statutes that say we have to do this work. There's no federal regulations that say states must build an ECIDS. So we're still in the business of selling this to some extent, you know, to our legislators, to the funders, to our program administrators who are very, at times, ingrained in the way that they do things. So seeing this across different states and the way different states are approaching this, it helps to sell it in a way, and in a way that they can say, oh, actually that's a great idea what California is doing or what North Dakota is doing, and really helps them to be able to hang their hat on possibilities of what we can accomplish with this. So yeah, looking forward to using this next time around. And I mean, it's in a beautiful format now, but you know, being able to see that in front of them, I think, is really going to facilitate that next round of use case development.
Thank you all. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and then Allie's going to send me some of the others that are coming in. But what comes after? So we've talked a lot about the process of creating the use case. What do you all hope? How does it get from having this product, and if the product isn't the result, how does this get you to actual using data to inform program policy decisions? How do you go from this document that I can download from a repository to the use of data? Can you guys kind of just talk about how you see that either happening, has it happened, or how it's getting you to that step of your development?
I can start. So for California, it's helped us. It drives conversations around what data and what data systems need to be included. I know Jared did a really good job of explaining how that was part of his process. And I think what our process was, so we kind of simultaneously, we were doing this data inventory, and we were working on our use cases. And I think what we've used the use cases as, or sort of the basis where we say, well, why would we need this data element, or why would we need to, you know, collaborate with this data system? It's because you go back to this question, oh, okay, that's what we're trying to answer. So therefore we need these data elements or this data system to be involved. And so it's kind of the so what behind everything. Otherwise you're just kind of throwing, oh, we got to include this and this. And so it's the why. And I also think the next step is like, so now that we have that, like, what is the, what we're sort of calling like the mock-up, like for our ECIDS, what does the actual product look like that people are going to use, whether it's a report or a visualization? And again, the use case provides an opportunity to look at the data that we're including, the questions we're asking, and say, like, how is that reflected in the mock-up? How is that reflected in the tool that the policy decision makers, the people in our state, at least for California, how does the product reflect the use case and the questions that we're asking that are important? So I think it's sort of a guiding document. And so I would just recommend for states to obviously go through this process in any form that it takes in your state, right? Whatever works for you, but to actually have something you can concretely go back to as sort of the so what and the pillar is really important, I think.
I agree. Lauren made some really great points. It really legitimizes what we're trying to do. I think the so what is a really important question for just being two little tiny words, but really helping drive a lot of important conversations. Here in Maine, it's anecdotally spoken about quite often that there's a lot of system improvements we need to do, but there's a lot of confusion and ambiguity of where those start from and how those changes shift and how you navigate across different systems that may directly or indirectly interact with each other just by the nature of early education and childcare work. So by combining these efforts in these stakeholder conversations, putting together a use case document that lays that all out, lays out those questions, includes and pulls in all those different players across those cross navigating agencies, it really helps highlight all of those things that, again, a lot of us are aware of here in Maine anecdotally, but putting it together specifically, intentionally, really drives productive conversations that we can derive next steps, even if they're little steps that we're not sure how to take yet, but ways to better deliver our system processes, better ways to look at our data, the value in data integration. It's still a conversation we're having as we're gaining more buy-in on that concept, but conversations around a use case scenario, for example, is helping drive those conversations of why data integration is so helpful to system improvement and policy.
All right, I think that's helpful. And so what I'm hearing from you all as we kind of think through this, and if you're another state, right? I mean, as Lauren pointed out, you're brand new to this, right? You're going to go into this tool, you're going to look at it, you're going to try to figure out, make meaning from it. You all highlighted a couple things, right? The pros are that it saves time, right? So if you're new to a position, it gives you a starting point. You don't have to do what Jared did and run around and ask everybody and make some new friends. Still a good idea to make new friends and call people up, but at least you can maybe look at their tools and then call them and ask them really specific questions. You're capturing and maybe documenting what I heard Lauren and Megan just describe is like you're documenting the so what and the why. So why are we doing it? It grounds the use cases when you look at the template ground in the background and the policy context within their state. Lauren highlighted that how they use their strategic plan. Megan talked about how they use a needs assessment. You're using documents that you're using generally in the state to then identify where your data needs are. But this goes to the next level and says, okay, what are the actual questions we need to ask? What are the data systems that need to inform it? And I do think it sounds like from your experience too, but I think it captures some of why these partners are needed at the table when people have a lot of competing priorities. It sounds like you guys are using it to get a lot of the buy-in and support because it's not you all writing it. And I think that's an important takeaway for people who are Lauren's not taking this and writing this by herself. Jared's not taking it and writing it by himself. They are literally bringing groups of people together who then co-author and manage these. And that I don't know if it's actually captured in the use case repository as much, but what I've seen from all the state examples so far is that many of you have authorship of the program leaders and the program policy people who are in your work groups who are helping to create that. And so it's really taking some of the onus off the leaders of the actual system development and putting the content back into the content leaders' hands and understanding those information needs. I'm also hearing that it makes it a little bit more action focused on what you're going to do next. So it gives you the next place to start to get to it's a big jump, but we have a data system too. We're going to use our data to take action. So it's building some of that culture of data use, it sounds like, in your states. And I think, Megan, you said nicely about identifying these gaps, but now it's like the so what? What do you do with that information now? How do you use this to then create mock-ups and reports and dashboards and anything else that's going to be used to inform the policy and program practice? And you've all also mentioned the prioritization activities. And so you all need that to get to the stage where you can actually develop these. So it helps maybe if you're a state that's in the process of doing prioritization to look through what other states have created in these examples to include that if they align to some of your policy priorities in the state. What I think I would take away from hearing from all of you kind of throughout all of the questions is that there is, and I think ECDataWorks and many other partners in the country have worked really hard to make sure that the ECIDS space is very collaborative because we are creating something that really didn't exist, 15 years ago. And so trying to leverage as much as possible to make quick work. But that's very thoughtful and intentional as we're doing this. We know that this is a slow moving process. So what I appreciate that you all have kind of shared is that it's not just like you call somebody up and say help, but the purpose of this tool was to be able to say, hey, can you help me with a developmental screening idea? Right, so it gets more concrete, your specific questions, instead of just saying, hey, I'm new and I don't even know where to start. When you call Lauren, you can say, hey, Lauren, you guys did a use case on workforce shortages and our state's really interested in that. Can you help us understand how you went about that, or what that looks like, or why is this agency included and not that one? Right, so there's lots of questions that I think make it more concrete and help us to make progress. So really appreciate the specificity that you all shared. I do recognize that this takes time. It takes a lot of your time as individuals to do this work. It takes a lot of time for people in your state to sit down and do this alongside you. So I just think that's something that gets factored in. And I appreciate that many of you have a process that you use to go about creating these and then using it to develop your ECIDS. So thank you all for sharing that. I think the questions that came in were kind of addressed through what you all just shared. So I think we can kind of summarize it that way. I really appreciate your time. Thank you to the state panelists who joined us today. Thank you to my teammates who joined to help present the why we do this. We have a couple ways if you want to continue to engage in this conversation. There's a couple ways you can do this. The QR code on this, there are examples that will get you to the actual use case repository itself. If you want to check that out, I encourage you again, it's all publicly available online. Thanks to our funder, Hazing Simons, for supporting that work. And was done really collaboratively with the community of practice of about 13 states who came together to think about what it would take and what that would look like. As Phil walked through the models and the different things we had to think about, that team was very, very helpful. So thank you to the states who are part of the community of practice. If you want to talk through what this process might look like and how you can use it, please do feel free to reach out to Allie. Or if you want feedback, you're like, hey, if you did this to the tool, it'd help us to use it better. We're always game for any feedback you have there. Please also send that to us. But again, we do have a community of people who are working on actually creating these. So again, if you're a new state to this and you're new to your role, please feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to add you to that community. But again, really appreciate the states who came and shared their expertise today and their thoughts. We know this has been a long journey, but I appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your time to share that with other states. So thank you for modeling the collaborative nature of our community and really appreciate you all being here today. Thank you.